when I then traveled, especially children would come, would take my picture or they would like that. So you really have to be aware of what environment you're in and how important it is in that environment. But at least to be conscious that you are intruding into people's worlds when you're taking pictures of them. And so at least if you have that consciousness, you'll hopefully respond to the right environment, do it the right way.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of Eyeshot 50mm, which is our interview series available on YouTube. Today we're sitting down with the great street photographer, Jack Simon. Jack Simon shoots with such a spontaneous and free way of seeing its own subjects, drawn to moments just for their surrealistic, their ironic, or simply strange vibes. He looks for something that it's not planned, not settled, and completely unexpected. So welcome, Jack. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being with us.
Yeah, I sound much better than I am, but I appreciate it.
That's even like just a small part of what you do. It's not even like half of it. So thank you again.
Absolutely. And as a message to our audience, I want to remind everybody to subscribe, to support independent street photography, to support independent publishing, and most importantly, Made in Italy Arts and Craft. And thank you everyone for your support. It may be just one small click to you, but to us, it means the world. And let's dive into this talk with Jack Simon. Thank you for being here.
So Jack, let's get actually to the hard stuff. And I want to immediately start off by asking you, who is Jack Simon according to Jack Simon?
An 81-year-old retired psychiatrist living in Northern California, married to the same wonderful woman for 57 years. And I have 2 children who live in Southern California and 4 grandchildren. And I've been passionate about photography for the last 20 years. There's probably more, but we'll stop.
And because you've talked about this already immediately, when did exactly photography enter your life?
Really about age 60. I always carried a point and shoot when I went on vacations and took pretty lousy photographs. But probably around 60, I started losing interest in my passion, which was windsurfing. And I had been doing that for about 20 years, and I was hoping to find something else to interest me. And I bought a small digital point and shoot and found that I could take better photos because I could get immediate feedback about what I was doing. And so I started playing around with photography. And then I learned about street photography or read about street photography or saw photographs from street photographers. I always liked art, but I thought that was, it would appeal to me what the street photographers were doing. And the other part is, since I sit all day in my job, I always like movement and being out. And so street photography gave me a way to just wander, doing what I like to do, which is really wander the streets.
Okay. And was there an event, a particular event, or was just, as you were mentioning, like losing some sort of interest in your passion? Was there something that turned it on for you? How did it change your way of seeing it? Because arts, are pretty complex as well. Arts, it's not just photography. What drew you exactly to photography? If you could elaborate on that.
Well, actually, I liked really all kinds of art. So I'm trying to distinguish what it was about photography that drew me in. And um, I liked looking at some of like Helmut Newton, some of the fashion photographers. Maybe because I like looking at beautiful women too, but I like what the photographers were doing. And Helmut Newton, particularly, things were very unusual type of photographs. And then went to some of the shows. Happened to be when I was at the museum, would see some shows on photography. And there was a photographer, Peter Joel Witkin, who lately is not as popular, but he was one of the earliest photo shows I saw. And it was very interesting. He sets up beautiful scenes, beautiful, not so the people, what he brings in are a little bit unusual. And I enjoyed his work. And so I think basically it was really a combination of seeing different people.
Okay.
I also like Guy Bourdin, a French. He's deceased now, but he would set. I was attracted to the people who would set things up in an unusual way. Tim Walker is another person who has these fantastical scenes. So I have to say, it probably was more the fashion photographers initially too.
Inspire you. Because I wanted to ask you, because fashion photography is a branch of photography, and street photography is also very small niche as well. And what exactly drew you to street photography, apart from being out in the streets, connecting with people? What is that for street photography truly attracted you?
Well, my definition of street photography will probably explain that too, because it
Yes.
doesn't have to be on the street. What I eventually evolved to thinking about was that it was spontaneous, it was unplanned, unposed, and that could be in my family life too. Basically, I like that spontaneity. I'm not a particular person who has the kind of intellectual creativity where I can come up with an idea and think about something that would be very unusual or interesting to do. I'm much more spontaneous or react to things spontaneously. And that's where I found being on the street, scenes would come into view, would react to them, and that worked for me.
Interesting, interesting. And I wanted to ask you, considering your long career as
Oh,
a
I should say,
psychiatrist.
I'm sorry for interrupting
Go
too.
ahead.
I
No
should say
worries.
one other thing too. My son, my son is a big influence and got me. He was taking photography classes in high school. He took photography class in college. He's a filmmaker
Oh,
or was a
wow.
filmmaker. Now, strangely, he's a therapist. So he's in my
Strangely, huh?
profession now, but he was a filmmaker. He made a couple of movies. So my influence was really and he had a fabulous collection of books, photography books. And so I
Wow.
think that was a tremendous influence. He was.
That's truly interesting. The people that are the closest to us, I feel like are the most inspiring as well. So that's really nice
Absolutely.
to hear. And I wanted to ask you, because you have such a long career as a psychiatrist, do you think your training or your notions, your awareness as a psychiatrist has helped your photographic vision, or if or not? How do you see that?
Well, I think it has, but I think it's much more on the unconscious and the intuitive side that I'm very aware of people. I'm very aware of being in the moment with them from my therapy. And I think that I basically am comfortable with intuitively responding to situations around me. And so I think it has
Okay.
affected me that way. Um, it
So in the way you
probably,
observe,
yeah, yeah.
the way you
I
observe
haven't really
people,
quite,
interact with them.
I think so. I think that, thank you. I
No,
think
no, no.
that's true.
I
No,
just wanted
no,
to chat with you as well. I wanted to ask you a question. If I thought maybe the
I,
way you observe, you connect with people in your past experience would have helped maybe your photography. That's all.
I need your words. I appreciate it. I'm
No.
sometimes not as fluent and cogent as I would
No.
like to be. So no problem with your feeding back something.
Okay. Okay. We can move on a little bit. And I wanted to ask you if what was again your first camera and what camera now do you use instead when you started off photography, if you could recall that again? And
Well, I had point and shoots that I don't. We're talking about when I started getting interested in photography, because so you would be a Fuji point and shoot camera. I don't even remember the types, but basically I could get um, the image right away, and from those, and I can't even remember what they were. And then I jumped into a Nikon SLR and had uh, some old lenses that my son actually had, and he gave to me, and then I used some other lenses that I bought, and so I moved around with a fairly large camera. And then Fuji came out with mirrorless cameras and the X100. And I started using the X100 right from the very beginning that it came out. And it's a small 35 millimeter equivalent. And basically, that's pretty much what I've used. I've had different varieties. Occasionally, I've lost the cameras by falling in the water. That's
Oh
another
no.
story, but yeah.
We will
Uh,
touch on that kind of story because we love that kind of story. And I wanted to know that the Fuji X100 seems to be a fan favorite. Yeah, multiple authors we have interviewed in the past couple of months have mentioned the Fuji X100. So it must be a good camera.
that's the best
I,
camera for street
I could
photography.
go
We'll see.
at a break, bring it out. They look good. They're small.
Yeah.
They look like film cameras. They have all the settings externally
Yeah.
for you to be
Yeah.
able to use like a film camera. And they take good, I think they take good photos. The initial ones were a little more quirky.
Sure.
You'd press the shutter button and occasionally it would go off right away or a little bit later. So they weren't as good, and the focusing wasn't as good, but they really developed a great camera. Unfortunately, a little bit too good in the sense that, and a little bit too popular because when I did drown one of my cameras, we could talk about later, I couldn't replace it.
Yeah.
So I went back to some of the larger cameras that I had for a little while, and now I have another X100.
Nice.
Cool. I would like to dive a little bit into your creative process and your personal style, so to speak. And I wanted to actually link back to what Lucrezia was saying about your career as a psychiatrist, because descriptors and are very important to people when they are um, coming up with their own sense of self. And there are labels even in photography. Do you see yourself as a street photographer, or do descriptors and labels not matter to you?
They don't matter right now. When I started out, yes, I saw myself as a street photographer. I was reading books on street photography. It was a wonderful collection of photographers in street photography now. Steve McLaren and Sophie Howarth developed that book. And then I was learning about photography. I have to say, when I started, I didn't even know um, what an aperture meant. I mean, I really was not that familiar with a camera. I had to take a weekend class to understand what that was about. So was not really very knowledgeable about the technical side. Um, but the work, reading some of these books, and also Flickr at the time, there were a number of street photography groups, and I would participate in those, and I learned from those. So, yeah, I'd say at the beginning, street photographer, but then got caught up in what is a street photographer other than being out on the street, and that's where I shifted over to enjoying spontaneous, unposed, unplanned, but not necessarily on the street. Certainly, often I'm in a museum, and a number of my photos are from museums, but I'm also around my family and find that if I can find a good photograph with them, I'm happy to do that.
Now that's a very fair reasoning, actually. And speaking of subjects, you have a variety of subjects, but how do you go about them? Like, what's the main thing that catches your eye when you think you found an interesting subject to follow with your camera?
Yeah. I don't know that I find necessarily an interesting subject. What I find at times is the light is beautiful in an area. If I'm outside, and I may um, look around to see if anything interesting appears when the conditions look wonderful. But for the most part, I think I'm just going about my life. And it was interesting to me. I look back at my photographs that I particularly liked. I did this years ago and found that many of them, or most of them, weren't when I was going out to do, quote, street photography. They just occurred. And sometimes they occurred on the way back from doing something, or they were at the airport. I like to travel, and my wife and I enjoy trips. And so they would occur very spontaneously and unexpected places for me. So I can't say that I actually see a subject. When I started, I'll say it a little differently too. When I started with what I thought was street photography, I thought if someone looked really interesting, that would be a good photograph. Or if someone was dressed in a very unusual way. But then I shifted from that idea to that, well, anyone can find someone who looks very interesting. And that, well, that wasn't necessarily for me interesting enough. And then I did, as you mentioned, start getting into the idea of storytelling. But um, that's also very spontaneous. I love to find a photo that is not documenting what's going on very clearly. May have some elements of, but I like to leave a photograph having questions in my viewers' minds or in my mind. I look back at some of these photos and think, what was going on there? Because I wasn't really quite sure. But it's the kind of photo that I like.
How important is the element of surprise in your photography?
It's very important for me. That's when something strikes me and I will take a photo, and it usually is surprise um, for me. It wasn't planned. The one aspect that's less surprising, but it's a mixture, is I became a bit interested in the idea of, I'd call them art chameleons. And they're people who weren't just mimicking the art and taking selfies, but they looked like the art in some way to me. And so I kept an eye out for that in museums. Um, and one day, actually, it's one favorite photo. I saw someone carrying a large painting, and I knew this person. I knew from where they were. I didn't know the person, but I knew from the way they were walking, they were going to pass in front of a mural that I particularly liked. And I thought it would be a good photo to see how this person would react with the mural. And so I followed them a little bit. But most of the time, I'm really just doing my own thing in the museum or wherever I am, and then something comes into view. I'm not sure I answered your question because we
No,
got away from it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because there are many layers to your answer, through your answers. I'm really enjoying them. And as I wrap up for this part, I wanted to ask, which are, in a few words, the recurring elements you look for in your art?
Yeah, I can answer it in maybe a similar way I've said before. I'm really not looking. It's very unconscious for me, very spontaneous. Um, and in fact, I digress a little bit. A very interesting period of time was on Flickr. From the Street Photography Now book, they set up a group where they had a different assignment from a well-known photographer each week, and you were to go out. I think it was over, it was a 1 week period. Go out, take photographs, and follow that assignment, and look for things in a certain way. And I found I really didn't enjoy doing that because it was made me too conscious. And so basically I cheated a little bit. I would do my normal I would do my normal thing. I would just go out and take photographs. And then at the end, I would look and see, well, which ones fit what the assignment was. And if they fit the assignment, and actually I was very fortunate. I came out, there were two co-winners at the end, and that boosted my confidence a lot. I was one of them, and it also boosted my photography library since that's what I won, were a number of photography books.
I wanted to ask you instead, Jack, because I feel like you talked about roaming around. I've talked about this, but you've also talked about this, and you've talked about roaming around the streets. And rather than just walking and seeing, you're observing, you're walking and observing things. Could you elaborate a little bit more on your process of going out and shooting? What do you look for again? And what is that drives you? You mentioned light, but is it just light? Or, and you mentioned with Marilu before a little bit, these recurring elements, but what is that truly draws your eye in photography when you shoot? What do you feel like it's a perfect shot when you're outside? You feel like it could be a perfect shot.
That's a very good question. I'm afraid I don't have a very good answer.
No, don't
Because
worry.
I think that, again, I'm not very focused on what I'm going to be looking for or even what I find. I'm more focused on where I'm going to get my next cup of coffee, or where I might go for a bite to eat, or what I want to do that day. I really want to enjoy being out on the street doing whatever I'm doing. And usually I try to incorporate going to a museum. And also I like to wander, although I don't as much anymore, what I would call sketchier uh, areas of San Francisco, a little rougher and a little more going on. People are on the street doing a little unusual things. And I also like street murals. I like street art. And so I would go to some of those areas too. Um, and occasionally, very rarely get into a little trouble with that. But
A little trouble. Why so?
occasionally, one time it turned out it turned out fun. But I turned around the corner. I was just spontaneously took a couple of shots, and these guys came running to me. And it turned out I was shooting, photographing a drug exchange.
No
And
way.
so he called over one person's looking and he's asking me what I'm doing. I'm trying to explain a little bit about street photography and showing him the photos I had taken. And then he calls his friend over because I had taken a picture of his friend. I said, I'm happy to get rid of any of the photos. But he turned to me and he said, which, first of all, I did get rid of the photos. And But he said to me, why are you taking pictures in this area? He said, you should go to Fisherman's Wharf. And Fisherman's Wharf is
Okay.
really a tourist area that I thought it was very clever that he said that to me, and I
Yeah.
always remember. But fortunately, um, they were kind.
Oh.
They weren't going to disturb me in some
Joy.
negative way. Uh,
It's
so
crazy
it
though.
is again. Most of this is spontaneous. I have to say too, but again, I think it's unconscious. Um, Gregory Crewdson is one of my favorite um, photographers. And I think I started getting interested in Gregory Crewdson again from my son's photo library. And do you know him? What he does is,
A little bit, yeah.
yeah, he creates these very elaborate. First, a major deal. He goes
Yeah.
scouting. He has people working for him. He builds sets. He has people looking for people who will be in his photographs. It's very elaborate. But then he sets up these surreal, a little bit quirky. You're not quite sure what's going on, uh, and I love the way his photographs look. But I don't have the ability or the interest to establish something like that. So occasionally, what I will find is something that just strikes me, something from his photographs. Uh, not it's very irregular. I mean, sometimes it's smoke. You'll see he has smoke coming off of something or a fire engine. The one behind me is, and that was a very, and it's that type of photograph, if I can find, that just strikes me. But I don't think, again, I'm thinking about it. But when I've gone back and looked at now some of his books, I realized, oh, that influenced me. I found something that looked like that.
And I wanted to ask you, what was the exact photograph that make you feel like, okay, I'm becoming a street photographer? If you have one, and if you can describe that photograph for us.
Well, I think that there are two photographs that one is probably what I would call just my first street photograph, because I was out on the street and a woman was walking her son or grandson, but he had him on a leash. And
Okay.
I managed to capture the two of them with shadows that looked a little bit like she was on a leash too from the shadow. And that intrigued me. I thought it was humorous. And so I would call that my first street photograph. First one that I felt very fortunate to get, and to me it was instructive, was at the airport leaving Japan. And it's a person going up the stairway above the planes. It looks like they're climbing into the sky. And
Love it.
I love the magical look to that photograph. And I would say that was probably the first
Yeah.
one that I felt, well, I could do something a little bit different. It was
Yeah.
different than the usual photographs I had been taking.
Yeah, the reflection of that photograph, because I feel like I know which photograph you're talking about, that you shot vertical as well, if
Yes,
I'm not
yes.
mistaken. So that photograph, the palette, the reflection, it truly makes it unique. So very beautiful photograph also from my side.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I would like to dive into your relationship with people and your surroundings. So, starting from, what's the trick to staying invisible when you're trying to get some interesting picture?
I'm basically just walking around on the street, and I don't think I'm particularly invisible. I will occasionally look if I see a person or a scene that I want to take a picture of. I won't go right up to it directly and shoot it. I might look to the side a little bit and look like I'm looking somewhere else and then take a photograph, but I'm hardly invisible. And um, the other thing that someone can do, and it really isn't me particularly, is that um, as some photographers will stay in one situation for a long period of time. We'll just be in line at a food stand, or they'll stand around there. And after a while, being in one place for a while, you become more invisible. I'm not good at standing around in one place for any length of time. Uh, and so I'm really not invisible. In the museum, everyone's looking at things. And if you're at, some people like to shoot also at, and I actually have at times too, at parades or things where people are very focused on other things. And so it's easier where you're not so visible. But everyone is shooting pictures nowadays, so it's not a problem.
No,
Uh,
that's fair.
you know.
So basically what we're talking about is shifting the focus. That's the main trick, basically. Have I gotten that right?
Uh, I do a little bit of that, but I also will walk up and take a picture. If the person sees me taking a picture, I'll have some after I've taken it. I'll have a little eye contact with them in a way to try to understand if it was okay. If anyone has a problem with what I'm doing, I may then go over and explain what I was doing and what I was interested in. But I, I don't want to do that at the beginning, because then I get a posed photograph. I get people doing this, and
Oh, no.
you know, no.
Not really
So
spontaneous.
no, no. So and I try to be respectful. It's more intuitive, but I feel that maybe my age helps me to get away with some of it. But yeah, that's pretty much my style. I don't think. I think there are times, if I've slowed down, what I was explaining to you before and you reflected back, was that if things aren't moving very much around me and there's someone I would like to take a picture of and I'm standing close by, I might look to the side a little bit and even take a photo of the side and then move over to them. But I would say not not too often. I think some of it is confidence now. I don't find that people are really very upset if they get into my photograph. And so I think as I've gotten more confident that that's okay, I'll take the picture. Um, when I gave a few workshops, one of what I tried to do was help people feel comfortable about shooting on the street and not shooting from the hip as much.
Okay. No, we talked about shooting from the hip with Chuck Patch, if I recall correctly.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, we're touching on a number of subjects and getting different insights from all of our authors. So it's
Sure.
amazing to have this collection of takes, basically. And speaking of comfort, actually, I wanted to touch upon this and ask you whether, especially in the beginning, if you ever had to overcome shyness or fear when going out for a shooting session?
No, I'm trying to think. In general, I I haven't. When I had the SLR camera with a larger lens on it, and this was years ago when not everybody was photographing. When I say years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I did manage to walk into some. Um, there was a fashion shoot going on, or there might be something a little bit unusual going on that maybe I wouldn't be invited to. But by having the camera, sometimes I would walk right in. I was at a fire in San Francisco, and I normally would not have been able to walk to where I walked to, observing the fire and observing the firemen. So I would have been anxious about that, but I was able to walk in because I had my camera with me. And but I would say in general, I'm not feeling particularly fearful about. I'm not that outgoing. I am a little shy, but I don't know if the camera makes me less shy.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I wanted to wrap this section up with one last question. And was there ever an encounter with a subject that deeply affected the way you view photography or even the way you view life in general? Was there a memorable encounter that you recall in photography?
Well, that's such a good question. It deserves a better answer than I can come up with. Nothing really comes to mind. I mean, I mentioned the men I took a picture of who were
Yeah.
unfortunately doing a deal, but they responded with humor, and or one person did, or at least I found it humorous when he recommended I go to a tourist area, but. I don't know that it changed my thinking. I don't know if this is exactly what you're meaning too, but I mean, I would try not to take photographs of people who look disadvantaged or on the street, and yet occasionally something has happened where I did take photographs like that, and I had to think about whether I would post those photographs or use those photographs. It doesn't quite answer your question, but it is something that makes me think about the situation, and it influences me. I'm reluctant to take the photograph, but occasionally I have to take the photograph. Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, I could tell you, I don't know if you want me to mention the kind of situation, but I was walking on the street, actually with Steve McLaren, um, and we see a man painting a scene on the street, and there's someone lying across him, and I'm thinking it's so weird. Why is he painting this man? I mean, it was a homeless person passed out on the street. It turned out he was photographing. He was painting someone else. There was someone else in the scene, and so I found that very interesting. And I have used that photograph. The other one that I've used uh, was I was walking with my wife in downtown San Francisco and look across the street, and it looked like someone was on fire, or I was seeing all the smoke coming off of a man, and I felt I had to go over and take a look at it, see what was going on, and we crossed at a crosswalk. But then impulsively, I walked through the middle of the street too. This drives my wife crazy because occasionally I'm not careful enough. Uh,
John,
walked
sorry,
across.
John.
Yeah, sorry, exactly. I try to be better, and and walked up and realized it was a homeless person sitting over a grate, warming himself from the smoke coming. And I took one picture, one photo, and moved on, and then realized I probably thought that I probably would not use that photograph. But the more I looked at the photograph, I felt it was really a very good photograph, and it told a couple of stories, and it certainly didn't show his face, and so it became, um, for me, one that I posted, and it's become a popular. It was
Yeah,
relatively popular too. Um,
it was. It was.
in fact, David Gibson put it in his. He's a wonderful photographer and a wonderful writer
Tim
too.
McLaren.
And
Yes.
no, Steve McLaren, but David Gibson.
David
Who you
Gibson. Oh, yes. We've also interviewed
you,
David. Yes.
you have
David is a
interviewed
great.
it, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
he's very good, and that helped my confidence because he's put a couple of my photographs in his books too. But and that was one that he actually put in the book and described that scenario of trying to decide whether you put a photograph in that you may have some mixed feelings about. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have that photo in the photo analysis section that we'll have later on, and I want to know even more about it. And I
Absolutely.
wanted to ask you just to interject just for a second.
Mhm.
You've grown up in Northern California, right? You've been there quite your whole life. And I wanted to ask you, do you think your
I'm
social
still
and
growing
cultural,
up.
of course, come on. And do you
Okay.
think your social and cultural background has, in a way, influenced the way you do photography? Or is something you never really thought about and was just more a matter of instinct, if we can say that? Because, living in different parts of the world what you see every day can influence one's thoughts and also one's creativity as well. What would you say about that?
Well, I would say it's another good question that I'm not sure about my answer. I've also been on the East Coast for a long time. I grew up in the East Coast, and I
Okay.
went to school in the East Coast, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I came out to California. So I've been influenced by both coasts, I guess, but I don't know that it's had a particular influence other than I've been very comfortable with streets and urban areas. And uh, but otherwise, I don't have a good answer for that.
Oh, that was
Mhm.
definitely a perfect answer. And another thing I wanted to ask you, just changing topic
Absolutely.
a little bit. And I wanted to ask you, a street photographer must be able to stay on topic of street photography. A street photographer must be able to capture that decisive moment, as Erica Tiberson used to say as well, where all the elements of the scene come together, light, composition, subjects, everything come together in the perfect moment. What is your decisive moment? Because I want to dive deeper into your thought process. We are now analyzing you. It's like
Yeah,
I'm
it's a, roles have changed.
absolutely.
I love it.
Just joking. Just
Yeah.
joking. But what's your decisive moment when you shoot?
It's another good question that I don't know I can answer very well. Um, I'm very much more impulsive, and I will, see something and jump into it right away. And I'm not always even clear what's brought me into it. I mean, I take lots of photos that the scene looks interesting. I'm at a parade, but none of those are really particularly decisive moment photos. Uh, so it is very spontaneous. And the other thing which um, I often will say to my wife, I want to go back there, take another photograph that looked like a great scene, and um, or I'll try to take another photo. I don't necessarily ask my wife's permission, uh, about that. But what she points out, and it's very true, it's always that first photo for me, almost always, that really is the correct photo or the one I choose. And most of the time, I don't use. I just take one photo at a time. I'm not getting multiple. I don't have it set so that I'll get multiple photos. And some of that is that I don't want to spend a lot of time reviewing all the photos. And the other is
Interesting.
it's always the way it's worked for me. So I take one photo. If I think of going back, it's never as good.
Mm,
And
fair.
and it's not something I can really teach that well because or say much about because it is very unconscious. Or I just don't want to give out my secret. But I'm
Oh.
kidding. No, no, I'm kidding.
We're taking all the secrets out today. No,
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
yeah.
joking. And I want to stay a little bit on topic, and I wanted to ask you, there is this debate, if we can call it like that, that street photography is art and documentary photography is about information in a way. Do you agree with that?
It depends upon who's taking the photograph, I guess, and the situation, because um, there's some beautiful documentary photography, and it really is very artistic. And I noticed some of the photos and look up the names and see it's often some of the same people take incredibly wonderful photos. Um, but it is about information too. And some street photographers are creating information about their times. Uh, Someone you've interviewed and you did a book of, Don Hudson. Uh, I think is an example of that, that he's a wonderful street photographer, but there's a lot of information. We'll go back over and look at his photos of the 70s and 80s, and much information there. So I
Yeah.
think it really depends on the photographer.
I totally agree with that. Because sometimes there is this thing that street photography cannot tell stories in a way, cannot inform people about different things. And I'm personally, I don't really find myself agreeing on that. I think, as you said, it depends on the photography. It depends also on the intention of the photographer itself,
Mhm.
him or herself. So that's something really interesting that you said. And I want to stay again, still on the street photography topic. And I wanted to ask you, we know you don't do it, but do you think in street photography is acceptable to direct, in a way, subjects or not? It's really not your case because we know like spontaneity and this way of seeing photography, it's part of your style. But do you think it is acceptable? This is another debate in the photography community, directing or not directing your subjects in a way.
I think it's okay to do it in any way that makes you comfortable and what you want to do, as long as you're defining what it is that you're doing. If you're if people are thinking that you're taking spontaneous, unplanned photos, but you're really setting them up, you're creating the wrong. You're giving people the wrong impression about what you're really doing. But I think that I don't think there's a reason to restrict yourself, or that someone, like the idea of even editing, people will say, well, you don't crop your photo. It's whatever comes straight out of your camera. But I think that it's good to define what you're doing, but I think I'm open to the idea that people are doing it differently. There are people who take,
Yeah.
they call it street portraits, but they line up the
Yes,
people and
exactly.
and that's what they do, and I think it's fine. Um, but it's different than the person who's taking the portrait spontaneously.
Totally fair. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
no, I would say fair. Okay.
I will pass it on to you.
Okay. I would like to talk a little bit about your gear and nerdy stuff, tools and techniques to be Jack Simon, basically.
Yes.
And are you more of a minimalist or do you go out and about while fully geared?
I'm a minimalist. I would say I'm fully geared with one little camera, and that's what I enjoy most. In the past, when I had the SLR, I would have another lens involved, but I try to keep that part simple. Um, Maybe some of that is that I just didn't grow up with photography in a technical way, but I find that I don't want to be thinking so much about the equipment and what I'm doing with the equipment, because I'd like to be available to find something that interests me outside to take a photograph of. So I would say it's pretty simple, and I try to set up my camera as easily as possible for me to not be changing things.
Okay. And what's the best lens, according to you, for street photography?
Yeah, I was thinking when you ask the question of some people, we used to ask you, what's the best camera? And we would say, well, it's the camera you have with you. And I would say it's very similar with the lens. I've tended to shoot slightly wide angle. So it would be a 35mm equivalent or 28. But 35 is what's on the Fuji X100. You can't change the lens of that camera. You're fixed with that. And I like that very much because, in a sense, I know what the scene's going to look like through the lens, just walking around. I know what it's taking a picture of. So I could shoot from the hip, but I don't tend to because I like looking through the viewfinder. But so I would say it's mostly that. Very seldomly, I've seen people shoot um, with zoom lenses, and we'll try to get very close. But I like the 35. I went on a trip shooting animals. I mean, I was out in nature, and I had my 35mm. I mean, I kept the same camera just because I was used to it. I should have had a different camera. So I'm just telling you, I shoot what I'm used to, and I like that 35mm perspective.
You have created like your own comfort in when it comes to gear and whatnot. And another thing I wanted to know is how much does gear influence your vision as a photographer, according to you?
I think very little. I mean, I like the way the camera looks, and so I like picking up the camera. I like carrying it. But I'm not sure that's affecting my vision outside. I alluded to it before, that I was on a trip and I unfortunately fell in the water while I was crossing a stream and and my camera was attached to me. So it got a good dunking and I couldn't use it anymore. That was an X1. That was fairly new X100. And, I mean, one of the variations of the X100. And the next day we were going out to area that had beautiful steam geysers coming up, and I wanted to take photographs. So my wife loaned me her old iPhone. It was not a cart one at all. And I took a picture from that I loved. That was the best, photo I had taken in weeks. And so that's what I had available.
Yeah.
Love that.
You just anticipated my next question because I was really about to ask you if a smartphone is valid gear to you, but I'm assuming it is to you. But would you like to elaborate a little bit on how a smartphone can be a good tool for a photographer?
Well, one is that it's often most always with you, so it's a good tool in the sense that you have the availability. This was an older one, and it took a decent photo, but the new ones are even better. The part that I used to feel that I could never use a smartphone for a photograph because I like looking through a viewfinder. And but after I lost that camera, and I wasn't able to replace it for a while, I started using a smartphone and found it was fine. In fact, I found there was an advantage to some degree when I don't have my eye behind a viewfinder. I'm much more in the experience and the scene at the time. And so I thought it has its own advantages. So
Yeah.
I think they're fine.
Cool. Thank you for your
I
insight
should
on
say
this.
more than fine. They're very good.
But like, we want raw and spontaneous even in our interview, so that's exactly what we're looking for. Another thing I wanted to ask on this wave of gear and techniques, how do you deal with unpredictable conditions such as wind, weather changes, unpredictable subjects, animals,
The crowd.
the crowds, anything you can think of that is beyond your control, basically.
Well, it's good actually to have a camera that's relatively water resistant, and so
We've learned our
not one
lessons.
that you can swim with. I mean, mine shouldn't have been underwater, but the camera I shoot, I can be out in any condition, and that works fine. I think having a smaller setup, which I have with the X100 and not a big lens, it makes it easier to maneuver around things. But I'm not sure that there's really a good answer to your good question, because I think we just deal with whatever we have at the moment. And I'm not in a great deal of bad weather. So certainly in California, I'm not, and on trips,
Exactly. Exactly.
I can't say I've really been in such terrible weather that worried me with my equipment.
Yeah, no,
Actually, the other thing I would say too is sometimes you get a little water on your lens and it looks good. I mean, you get something very interesting, and I think the the chance occurrences can make things very, very interesting. I mean, Ido, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right. I mean, I think he smears things over his lens at times and gets a certain look through that, and they're beautiful. I'll
Okay.
stop in the middle of that sentence.
Incidentally, we've talked about textures with David Gibson. So
Yeah, because he does double exposures and all these things. So texture is something that I think you're very familiar with Gibson's work. So that's for sure one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And another couple of things I wanted to ask you. What's the secret for telling one full story with one single frame in street photography?
Well, I don't, I'm not sure. I think that keeping it a little bit ambiguous, I mean, finding scenes that aren't spelling out every part of it, of what's going on, it can tell a story because it tells the story to the individual looking at it, trying to figure out what's happening. But I mean, it's a very good question. And I think what we're often trying to do is compose the scene through our viewfinder and find the right information that we want and walk around the scene. Um, I, I, I do think it's important to be nimble and walking around to find uh, the right amount of information you would like at that time. But I'm not really good at answering the questions in the sense that so much of that is just off the cuff for me. I hate to keep saying that, but that really is pretty much not thinking it out. I just do it.
That's basically your core philosophy. That's a message. Like
It's what works for me. I mean, we all have
Yeah.
find what works for you. I think everyone
Absolutely.
has
Yeah, that's what I
has
meant when
differences.
that's what I meant when I was talking about comfort earlier. So
Mhm.
basically, you're building your own method, your own pace, which is great for photography in general, for art in general.
Absolutely.
Okay, just the last question before we wrap up this section really nicely. And I wanted to ask you, there's a debate between focusing manually and going on autofocus. How do you decide when to use that setting?
Well, you used a word before that answers it again for me, and that's comfort. I am interested in comfort, and so I set it for autofocus. But that being said, when I started out, I was using manual focus lenses that my son had given me, and I did some work with that. But I find it's easier for me to use autofocus. And with the autofocus, occasionally you have the capability of moving the focus slightly too. And so you can look through at the scene and slightly move the focus if you want to. But I would say for the most part, it's comfort. Uh, there are people who I think they enjoy the process of the manual focus, and that's what works for them.
Okay, nice. I want to jump in before we completely change section, and I want to still stay on the nerdy stuff for a second. And I wanted to ask you, you jokingly said that your post-production is a trademark. And without going into a secret trademark, without going too much details, sorry, yes,
Yeah.
without going into too much details, what is your post-production workflow, and how important is post-production in your final photographic vision?
Two parts of the post-production. One, I don't know if you're talking about, is really just editing and finding the photographs that you think are worthwhile. And I spend time with that. I would say that's really an important first part of trying to figure out which photos, or if there are any photos that are particularly interesting to me. Then I will work on it's pretty simple. If the exposure is a little off, I'll work with the exposure. Um, I will I will occasionally crop. It's not a bad word in my mind, but
For some people it is.
I know, and but your taste changes with things. So I could tell you what my taste is, and it'll change. I've gone back over older photographs I've taken and uncropped them, thinking, well, it looks much better now. I think the bottom line for me is the look, and what I'm thinking of looks pleasing to me. And if the exposure needs to be improved, if the cropping would make it a better photograph, I'll do that. But then my taste may change, and I have gone back over and uncropped and cropped again. So I think you try to find what you like in the photo, what you're trying to achieve. I like things a little. I add a little black sometimes. I like it to look a little, but I'm sure that if I go back in time or in the future, I don't think it's really important in my mind to have rules about that you should or shouldn't do certain things. Mainly because that doesn't make me comfortable, and I don't
Yeah.
I don't see it that way.
Okay, that's really interesting. Before we move on, I want to still stay on this, and I wanted to ask you, when you're outside shooting, do you shoot as much as you can, and then later on you decide the photograph, or do you have a more analog approach to look at things and be like, okay, I'll try to pre-visualize?
To me, I wonder, well, why didn't I take multiple shots at a particular time? Because things are changing, but I don't. I will almost always take a single shot. And if I've gone a period of time and with my camera and not taken a photograph, I'll take a photograph. I like taking a photograph. I like the feeling of that, but it's not all the time. And I really, um, and I think that's changed a little bit. Probably at the beginning when I first got interested in photography, I was taking many more photos at the moment, but it's slower now.
That's a very different approach. Nowadays with digital, uh, photographers tend to lose that kind of analog approach, and just in the midst of all the photographs I've taken, one for sure, good one will come out. So that's interesting what you said. Absolutely.
You haven't asked me about film. I've heard
Yeah. Do you shoot film? Have you ever shot film?
occasionally when I've gotten a toy camera from my son. He's given me some different cameras at times, but I, for the same reason that I've given for a number of my answers, I'm a little impatient. I like things a little more immediate, and
Okay.
I can't wait to get the film developed. It just doesn't work for me.
Okay.
So I tend not to use. I do have a new camera.
Oh,
I brought it here for you.
nice.
It's a toy. It's a toy camera, and my son
can
brought
still
it
use
when
it.
when we went on a trip recently with his children, young girls. He got each of them one of these cameras, and it's fun because it, it's like an Instamatic, but it's an old style where it's using normal paper and it puts out an image.
Could you hold
So
it
I'm
up?
playing. Pardon me?
Could you hold it up for the camera because it looks very pretty?
Oh, cute.
Oh, it's very nice. This is some picture. I'll take a picture of you.
Oh,
Yeah. Shall we pose or shall we do it street photography style?
Okay. Oh, that's good.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can
Okay.
show,
And
if you can show how it turned out.
oh, I'm going to. I know. I definitely am going to.
Love it. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, can we have that? Like a scan?
Sure. And I'll show you another thing it will do. So you can play. I mean, these are very cheap cameras that you can acquire, and they have a number. You actually can save the images on a chip, so you could put it into your. But I want to take one more of you
Yeah.
both. So I have one of the.
Amazing.
Nice. I have this other. So this is one of the special effects. This is a.
Oh,
It does it like a cartoon. Um,
Yeah.
that's so fun. So much
yeah.
fun. Love
So
it. I want
if
one too.
actually, yeah, I don't think it necessarily will create anything different for me, but for my son, who's very artistic, he actually used some of the results of this along with a painting that he made, and
Yeah.
so I think there are uses for it. But for me right now, it's just fun.
We have to get one. We have to get one for the summer.
For the studio, yeah.
Absolutely.
Here. Nice. Check. Moving on into our conversations. Before we a little bit touched upon your photographic inspirations, not necessarily just street photographers, but in general, which one were your inspirations?
Well, Gregory Crewdson, again, for that type of the scenes that he's developed, really a large number of the usual names of street photography, even going back to Diane Arbus, and like some of her photos very well. So many of them. The name it's really a too big of a group, so I don't say any really stand out. But I would say, as I mentioned before, it was um, the fashion photographers and photographers like Gregory Crewdson and Peter Joel Whitkin who have these uh, develop these scenes. Interesting to mention as an aside that Gregory Crewdson's father was an analyst, a psychoanalyst, and he thinks a lot of the influence for him has to do with
Father.
that's his father.
Interesting, because
But,
he has this very strange way of like everything is staged, but it gives you also like a sense of alienation of society. Because I've looked a
Mhm.
little bit into his work, and it truly, even if it all is staged, it feels so real and relatable to what we're doing these days as well. So
Yeah,
I
I
see
know.
this
Mhm.
surrealistic approach that you got in your
Mhm.
photography from him. And
Yeah.
moving forward with this, we've done our own works. We also saw that Magritte was a big influence on your photography. Could you say something about this? Could you elaborate in what ways did painting, in that sense, influence your approach to photography?
I think the entire surreal painting movement,
Movement.
because it's imaginative and it's different and it bends reality. I mean, in a sense, that's the interest for me has been finding reality, taking a photograph, but having it be questionable about what's happening. And so I'm not bending it in the same way as a surrealist painter or photographer might, but I like that style. Um, I think Edward Hopper is another interesting artist, not surreal, but there's a sense of feeling of the people in his paintings that I like very much. And I think I see them a bit in Crewdson, what Crewdson has done too. There's often an individual who's looking out somewhere. Sometimes it's the back of that individual and you see what they're looking at. And one of my favorite photographs of Diane Arbus is this woman sitting at a counter smoking in New York City and just alone. And you're just looking at her and kind of getting a sense of what's on her mind, or you're imagining what's on her mind. And so that for me is her, Edward Hopper, um,
Yes.
and photographs that I would, like to take. But I don't know it until it's taken. And then I look at it later and say, well, maybe that fits.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, really.
Okay, and I would like to dive a little bit into social media, also because I finally remember what I was trying to conjure about
Good.
Flickr. Okay, and I
It's
will
always
start with
reassuring to me when young
yeah.
people can't remember what they were saying too,
Oh,
since
okay.
we are always.
Yeah. I don't think
Wait.
our brains are wired to take all the information that we're taking nowadays. That might be a contributing factor.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. What I was trying to say about Flickr is that Flickr is a multi-generational platform for photographers. Was there ever an encounter with an especially young photographer that changed your perspective or really made you feel that the world of photography is changing?
Good question. I'm not sure it's a full answer. It certainly isn't a full answer to what you're saying, but I'm a member of a collective, Burn My Eye, and a number of the newest members, their photographs are incredibly good. They're not as much interested, some of them at least, most are not interested in the kind of storytelling that interests me. But visually, they're very interesting. They're able to find photographs through their very artistic eyes. And I've been very impressed by that. It's not the photos I take or can take. I'd like to take a number of them, but that's influence. I mean, I enjoy that. But I don't spend a lot of time looking at other people's photographs on social media. For me, at the beginning, Flickr was very instructive, and I was part of groups that was helping me, and I would get feedback from other people and met people on Flickr who I felt I liked their feedback, their ability to look at what I was doing, and I felt we could have a good interchange and develop some relationships that way. Um, I think too much now. You hear people talk about the algorithms and the likes and the things that, and to me, it's not something that interests me that much.
Okay, another question I wanted to ask is, do you feel there's a stark difference between having a real life photography community and an online photography community in terms of the feedback you get, the insight you share, or even the friendship that you can build?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my answer that it seems like a lot of my answers are really in the gray zone. I think that it's in between, eh, because it's very hard to be absolute about it. I've made some fabulous friends on um, initially through social media. One of them is one of my closest friends who lives in Spain. And occasionally, when I travel and when my wife and I travel, we'll meet up with him. And it's a great relationship. And he was very helpful around my photography and his responses. So I think it's there. Um, and uh, in personal life, I haven't found many people who I could sit with and go over photographs. I did for a while. The person moved out of the area. And I liked his eye and his ability to respond to my photographs, even though he did architectural photography. He was not at all interested in street photography. But I felt that was a very good interaction. So I think it's possible. I think that really you have to find, and it's there. I'm sure it's there on Instagram, it's there on Flickr. You just have to find the right groups, the right individuals, and not worry too much about um, the likes and the hearts or whatever else goes on to acknowledge it. So it's available.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I would say we have elaborated.
Yes, I just want to close this section before we go into something a little bit more creative with the photo analysis and stuff. I have just two questions, and then I swear we'll be done with the boring ones. I just wanted to talk a little bit about ethics and privacy, just two very fast questions. And the first question I wanted to ask you is, street photography often gets the heat about privacy and consent. What's your take on that?
Well, the different areas I think about, one is children. I think you have to be careful. And even more so nowadays, because there's so much more awareness about um, the privacy of children. And so I think it's important if you photograph, in my mind, when I'm taking, if there are children that might be in my photographs, I will ask permission of the parent around me. I don't want to intrude on, I certainly don't want to take a photograph of a child. Although, that being said, there were a number of children running through the fog in this. I wasn't able, the things will happen, and I can't always get permission. But I do think you need to be careful. I think you're always concerned. It really depends upon the culture and where you are. When I traveled to India, which my wife and I traveled, we loved it. But we first got there, I was concerned, what was it going to be like? And can I use my camera? And I'm walking on the beach and I see someone with a SLR who clearly was out photographing, and I asked him about it. And I said, well, is it a problem? Do people not like being, having their privacy interrupted? He said, they love to have their picture taken. They'll ask you. And it's true. When I then traveled, especially children would come, would take my picture, or they would like that. So you really have to be aware of what environment you're in and how important it is in that environment. But at least to be conscious that you are intruding into people's worlds when you're taking pictures of them. And so at least if you have that consciousness, you'll hopefully respond to the right environment, do it the right way. But that being said, having said that, and to go back, a lot of times what we're doing is very spontaneous, and we're just taking a photograph.
Exactly. Absolutely. Always being aware of your surrounding. That's for sure one take that we could say with this discussion. Thank you. I think that really answers my question for sure. I guess we can finally move on to the photo analysis part. So Marco has selected a set of different photographs. So the first one, let me know if you can see the screen, is this one.
Yes. And this is the one I mentioned that before, that I went across the street, saw this, wasn't sure what was going on, took the photograph, and then wasn't sure I could really post it. But then thought about it and realized I thought it was a good photograph. I actually thought it also documented life and our time, that you have people on one level shopping, enjoying themselves in front of stores, and you have this poor individual, who's on the street warming himself. So I think I could call it a documentary photograph, but I think for me, what it really is about, the reason I become attracted to this kind of photograph is the mystery of it at first. But then because I know what it is, it's not so mysterious. And I had those mixed feelings.
I think it's a beautiful photograph for sure. And it gives that sense of mystery. The next one would be this one.
It's my grandson in there. And he's now a junior in college. So he was taken a while ago. So the one we took our grandsons on their first little train trip when they were visiting. And it was a very short trip. We went about 30 minutes to go to another town to go to a toy store. But on the train, this other child was sitting behind, who's not related to me, and was trying to get his attention, and was putting his little toy in the window. But my grandson was just focused out the window and created an eerie image, I have to say. So I like the whole photograph, both because it reminds me of a wonderful time, but I like the way the photograph turned out.
Yeah, I feel like the Spider-Man and the shadows on the window, they truly kind of combine with each other.
Yeah, and that's love.
Really beautiful.
I mean, I don't know, to me, it was luck.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a game I used to do when I was a kid, where I imagined there was like exactly Spider-Man jumping from pole to pole while I was riding the car. There were no phones, so I had to seek ways not to get bored.
My imagination.
Yeah, I was with my imagination like that.
Next one. Let's hear.
The one that you also have in your kitchen.
This is in Venice Beach, California, and I had seen that ball. I don't know the person, but I had seen the ball recently. It was sitting on top of a ledge outside of a store, and I guess they were removing it at this point. And so I happened to be walking on the street and saw the scene, saw the ball, and walked out into the street a little bit because I liked the fact that this person was on the phone, and I thought well, I took the photo. That was pretty much what it was about. The ball was getting removed at this point, and the street is pretty quiet. This is early in the morning in Venice, so I was out just getting some coffee.
Okay, interesting. Very, very nice. One last sip. Yes, exactly. I told you before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so strange.
So this is this was a scene that I initially just kind of blew my mind at the beginning of this guy taking a picture of this poor homeless. I mean, not taking a picture, drawing, painting. But then you can see I'm with Steve McLaren. I love the photo for different reasons because Steve McLaren was probably disgusted. Why am I stopping? He's walking ahead.
Yeah.
But Blake Andrews, who's right there with us, he was visiting San Francisco at the time, so he was on this little walk with us. He's interested. He's watching the painter, and we talked to the painter. He explained that he was he was painting in different scenes around San Francisco, and the person he was painting, who's standing in front in a maroon shirt, owns the restaurant that we're just by. And the poor man on the street, it's just a scene. Unfortunately, that's part of San Francisco. It's part of the world at this point. It's someone who's passed out there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
And we took, actually, Blake, I took a couple of photos in that scene because we were standing talking to the person, but this was the first one I took and the one that I've used.
Okay, that was it.
Great.
Jack. Okay, we're done with the first part, and we're absolutely thrilled to have you with us. It was such a special journey. Yeah, we've discussed so many things. So thank you again for being with us and taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Jack.
Well, thank you. You both were very kind with me in spite of my answers, but I enjoyed it as much as I can enjoy this kind of interview. I did enjoy it.
Your answers were great. Don't worry. And well, see you soon then.
See you soon,
Jack.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jack. Thank you.